My pranams to all of you. Thank you very much for showing interest in Mahatma Gandhi. I am grateful to the organizers for inviting me. It's an honor. Well, the whole world is realizing the futility of war and the importance of Gandhiji's emphasis on non-violence in thought, speech, and action. We are saddened to witness how Gandhian values are being attacked, forgotten, and abandoned by so many people in his own country. The people of India have always followed different religions. We belong to different castes and communities. We speak different languages, and yet we have lived together for centuries. Unfortunately, this diversity is not being seen as a strength and instead is being used to divide us. That too with violence. According to Gandhiji, ahimsa, meaning non-violence, is the chosen means to arrive at satya, meaning the truth. The other day, while reading one of the diaries of Mahadev Desai, Gandhiji's personal secretary, I came across an interesting conversation between Gandhiji and a revolutionist. On the 7th of March in 1931, a revolutionist went to meet Gandhiji and spent barely 5 minutes with him. He was impatient to see India free as soon as possible. He asked Gandhiji for how long we are going to wait. Gandhiji replied, "You have not tried non-violence as yet, have you?" So he said, "You are trying it for the past 10 years, but I haven't witnessed any success." Gandhiji replied, "If you are a student of history, you should know that your experiment has been going on since 1905. Actually, Gandhiji was referring to the 16th of October 1905, the day Viceroy Lord Curzon divided Bengal. And from that day onwards, policy of violent political agitation was implemented. Gandhiji told the revolutionist, "Give me at least 5 more years. After that, you may do whatever you prefer." "Okay," said the revolutionist. "I will announce this in my party," and he left. Gandhiji mentioned non-violence or love after truth among the 11 vows he had prescribed for the inmates of Gandhi ashram. While explaining ahimsa, he said, and I quote him, that mere non-killing is not enough. The active part of non-violence is love. The law of love requires equal consideration for all life, from the tiniest insect to the highest man. One who follows this law must not be angry even with the perpetrators of the greatest imaginable wrong, but must love him, wish him well, and serve him. Although they must love the wrongdoer, they must never submit to his wrong or his injustice, but they must oppose it with all their might and must patiently and without resentment suffer all the hardships to which the wrongdoer may subject them in punishment for their opposition." Unquote. Only with unshakable inner courage one can act upon Gandhiji's words. In 1909, when he had gone to England, he had a discussion with some Indian youngsters who believed that only armed struggle can bring about the desired change in India. For Gandhiji, replacing a Union Jack with the Indian flag was not Swaraj. On his return journey, he wrote his first and the most powerful book, Hind Swaraj, in Gujarati. It was a declaration of culture of non-violence against the culture of violence. Gandhiji firmly believed that there is a limit to violent action and it can fail. Non-violence knows no limits and it never fails. He exemplified this in his life and succeeded in convincing hundreds and thousands of satyagrahis who participate in the struggle for India's freedom. A non-violent grassroots level mass movement ultimately won and became an example for many other countries. Those who are bent upon criticizing Gandhian thought or even Gandhiji as a person, they pick up a single sentence from his speech or article and say that his views are irrelevant or outdated in the present context. Or they accuse him of making contradictory statements. For example, in his article titled The Doctrine of the Sword, Gandhiji has stated, and I quote him, that I do believe where there is a choice between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence. Unquote. If this sentence is taken out of its specific context, it would be certainly misunderstood. How can an apostle of non-violence speak in favor of violence? But while narrating an incident in South Africa, Gandhiji said, and I quote him, "When my eldest son asked me what he should have done had he been present when I was almost brutally assaulted in 1908, whether he should have run away and seen me killed, or whether he should have used his physical force, which he could and wanted to use, and defend me, I told him that it was his duty to defend me or anybody in a similar situation, even by using violence. I would rather have India resort to arms in order to defend her honor than that she should, in a cowardly manner, become or remain a helpless witness to her own dishonor." Unquote. Gandhiji's writings have certain themes that had a context at that time, and there are others that are timeless. American journalist Vincent Sheehan, who was born in 1899 and died in 1975, he was a scholar of Gandhian study. He has mentioned, and I quote him, that when we consider Gandhi's teachings as a whole, we see plainly that it falls into two distinct categories: that which concerns all men and that which concerns the special condition of India in the 20th century. Unquote. For example, when he said that there is enough for everyone's need, but not for even one man's greed, we can view it as a universal truth for a sustainable ecosystem. It's a timeless truth. Gandhiji's truth was not just abstract, but he was also pragmatic and thoughtful. In one of Gandhiji's letters written to my mother in 1933 from the central jail, Gandhiji mentioned that do not give alms to poor, give them work so that they can live a life with dignity. According to the recently published Oxfam report, and I quote, the top 10% of Indian population holds 77% of the total national wealth. 73% of the wealth generated in 2017 went to the richest 1%, while 670 million Indians, who comprise the poorest half of the population, saw only 1% increase in their wealth. Many ordinary Indians are not able to access the health care they need, and 63 million of them are pushed into poverty because of health care costs every year. This means almost 2 people every second. It would take 941 years for a minimum wage worker in rural India to earn what the top paid executive at a leading Indian garment company earns in a year, unquote. These figures are appalling. Practically all age groups in rural and urban areas suffer from unemployment, discrimination, exploitation, injustice, deprivation of basic needs like food, shelter, and clothing. This is also a form of violence. It seems words like Sarvodaya, which means well-being of all, is erased from the vocabulary. I would like to quote from India's first 5-year plan, which said, and I quote from that, village industries, small scale industries and handicraft, whose importance was for the economy as a whole, can scarcely be exaggerated, have been given greater emphasis in the plan, unquote. And then India's great pioneer of handicrafts, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, said, and I quote her, she said, it was only after I met Gandhiji that I came to understand the deep relationship of handicrafts with our daily life. Therefore, in the Indian tradition, creation does not mean making novel and exotic articles to please one's fancy, but endowing everything we use in daily life with beauty. Therefore, nothing is created without a purpose, unquote. On job losses, India's finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, said in 2019, that most of the employment in the economy sector is generated by the informal sector, which remains undocumented. The National Sample Survey Office data talk about the formal sector, and I quote her, in India, the informal sector is where majority of the employment is, and if there is stress there, I'm willing to hear from them, unquote. We are waiting for the day when informal sectors will be heard. They suffered the most during pandemic. 20th century has witnessed widespread violence in many countries around the globe. Gandhiji's contemporaries, like Benito Mussolini of Italy, he said that democracy is beautiful in theory, but in practice, it is fallacy. Let us have a dagger between our teeth and a bomb in our hands and an infinite scum in our hearts. This is what he said. While Gandhiji said, truth is God, Adolf Hitler of Germany said, Make the lie big, make it simple. Keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. The victor will never be asked if he told the truth. Unquote. But Gandhiji continued to insist on truth and non-violence. It is very unfortunate that utterances of such dictators are put into action even today. In the midst of heart-wrenching bloodsheds of world wars, Gandhiji charted a new path. In South Africa, where he had gone only for a year to earn his living, he stayed back for almost 21 years. He gave a call to the Indians residing in South Africa in the year 1906 to fight against injustice and fight for the dignity of life without weapons. Since no better term was available then, this weaponless fight was known as passive resistance. There was nothing passive about it. It was a proactive movement with tremendous inner discipline. In Hind Swaraj, he said that if, and I quote him, that if the story of the universe had commenced with wars, not a man would have been found alive today. The fact that there are so many men and women still alive in the world shows that it is based not on the force of arms, but on the force of truth or love. Violence is more worrisome now than it was ever before, because in the 21st century, it has percolated down up to the school and the streets. Innocence of children is fast disappearing, and half-baked maturity is gripping them strongly. And for this, adults are responsible. Children are witnessing competition, conflict, insecurities, egos, self-righteousness among adults on petty issues. The world is shaking like a pyramid made of a pack of cards. When one card loses its balance, they all fall down. These ground realities make us wonder, what happened to our age-old maxim of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam? The world is a family. What do we mean by family? Is it only our blood relations? For most of us, yes. But for Gandhiji, it was the whole world, the last man standing, whom he deeply cared for. Checkered Indian history has recorded various battles and conflicts, and yet the country has stayed together for centuries. The partition of India in August 1947 has left scars on many hearts that are not yet healed. Many families got split, lost their loved ones, or went missing. Gandhiji said, and I quote him again, "What does unity consist of, and how can it be best promoted?" The answer is simple. It consists in having a common purpose, a common goal, and common sorrows. It is best promoted by cooperating to reach the common goal, by sharing one another's sorrows, and by mutual toleration. Unquote. He said further in the 6th October issue of Young India in 1920, and I quote him again, "The union that we want is not patched up thing, but a union of hearts. It must not be a mere truce. It must be a partnership between equals, each respecting the region of the other." Unquote. Gandhiji always stressed on equality among those who are different and unequal. Since good and bad coexist in human mind, It requires a continuous process of self-discipline and self-reformation. Evil forces quickly collude, and the good continue to work even in isolation or in small pockets. This is one of the reasons why there is so much violence. Some conflicts have taken place in the name of nationalism. Nationalism is not evil. It is not narrow and selfish, but it has no room for hatred. One doesn't need to demean or put down another nation to feel good about one's own country. There is no reason to divide us in the name of nationalism. Gandhiji says, and I quote him, "Nationalism is like virtue. It is its own reward. A nationalist will always think of service, never of power or riches." Unquote. Gandhiji used to advise politicians to beware of power because it corrupts. Money and power are often used to dominate others. The meaning of nationalism, in the simplest term, is working towards national goals that would benefit all equally, and that tantamount to humanism, the supreme quality all human beings inherently possess. Humanism gets suppressed by greed and power. People's lives and aspirations change with changing times. However, the goals of nationalism, securing good conditions for people's life, providing protection against disruptive forces, creating an environment in which there are equal opportunities for all to grow, they all remain the same. In a confusing scenario in present times, where values sound like abstract idealism or outdated and obsolete, talisman given by Gandhiji is worth remembering at all times. He said, and I quote him, "I will give you a talisman. Whenever you are in doubt or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man whom you may have seen and ask yourself, if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him? Will he gain anything by it? Will it restore him to a control over his own life and destiny? In other words, will it lead to Swaraj for the hungry and spiritually starving millions? Then you will find your doubts melting away." Unquote. But today, these words are completely forgotten. The gap between those who have and those who do not have is constantly increasing. Gandhiji's actions were ethical in every sphere of his life. For him, means were just as important as the end. Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, an eminent Buddhist thinker based in Japan and the president of Soka Gakkai International, an organization that works for peace, education, and culture, said, and I quote him, "Humanity, which ought to be the major focus, is often sacrificed to the interests of politics and economy, which ought to exist for the sake of human happiness. We must correct these false priorities and the vicious circle they generate. Under prevailing circumstances, selfish people, and they are very numerous, prey on others for their own power and advantage. The first step towards peace is knowing the principle that it is wrong to build one's own happiness on the unhappiness of others. Unquote. Gandhiji never wanted India to rise on the ruins of other nations. He had written in Young India long before Dr. Ikeda was even born, and I quote him, "If India has violence as her creed and I have survived, I would not care to live in India. She will cease to evoke any pride in me. I cling to India like a child to its mother's breast, because I feel that she gives me spiritual nourishment I need. She has the environment that responds to my highest aspirations. When the faith is gone, I shall feel like an orphan without hope of ever finding a guardian." Unquote. So what Dr. Ikeda says about peace and the kind of vision Gandhiji had for India are the blueprints of nation building and character building. When one builds character on the basis of truth and nonviolence, when one fights with nonviolence as a tool against injustice and dishonesty, one contributes towards building the nation. And when nations are built on this strong philosophy, they contribute towards creating a world that is like a family. Nationalism, therefore, in the modern perspective, has to be broad-based. The moment one excludes others as they are perceived to be different and considers oneself superior, the society gets divided and becomes polarized. India has a composite democratic culture. How rightly Gandhiji said way back in 1920, and I quote him, that our difficulties are of two kinds: those that are imposed on us and those that are our own creation. The latter are far more dangerous because we often cling to them and therefore are reluctant to remove them. Unquote. Those who exclude others because of their perceived differences, they do so because their vision is blurred. Their understanding and experiences are too limited to think of any other alternative. Democracy is a promise of compassion. It's a promise of interrelationship. When one works towards a more inclusive goal, his or her personal goals are achieved as a matter of course. Like when you make a big door for an elephant to pass, smaller animals can anyway pass through it. I would like to share Gandhiji's views on religion. What I understood from Gandhiji's perspective of religion is that it teaches moral and ethical way of living harmoniously in the society. It has no miracles or superstitions. It does not divide people of different cultures because it recognizes fundamental goodness in all. The purpose of understanding religious philosophy is for its application in one's life for self-improvement. It's a lifelong process. Gandhiji has spoken about his own continuous evolution. We know about Gandhiji's favorite devotional song, Vaishnava Jana. It was written by Narsi Mehta, the 15th century saint poet of Gujarat. Its first two lines are, Vaishnava Janato tene kahiye, je peed parai jane re, par dukhe upakar kare toy, mana abhiman na aane re. It means the person who understands the pain of others is known as Vaishnava. He helps others who are suffering but never takes pride in it. The word Vaishnava literally means a devotee of Lord Vishnu. In each line of this poem, Narsimha defines a true Vaishnava. These are basically the qualities of a good human being. This song was often sung during the morning and evening prayers at the ashrams. A number of outsiders used to visit Gandhiji at the Phoenix settlement in South Africa. One of them was Joseph Royappan. He was a Christian and was good at music. He loved singing Vaishnava Jana song. As written by Gandhiji in his letter to his nephew Naran Das, dated 30th September 1930, and I quote, "Once, instead of Vaishnava Jana, he sang Christiana Jana, and all joined him instantly. I could see Joseph's joy knew no bounds. A good human being can be of any religion from any part of the world." Unquote. And in the same letter, Gandhiji also mentioned that the late Dawood Seth, his son Hussain, often stayed at the ashram. He used to join the prayers quite enthusiastically. In a very sweet, melodious voice, accompanied by an organ, he used to sing, "Ye bahare baag duniya chand rose." The spring in the garden of world is but for a few days. We all learnt to sing that song, and it was often included in the prayers. Unquote. It has been recorded by the historians that just as Joseph Royappan had replaced Vaishnava Jana with Christiana Jana, Imam Sahib had replaced it with Muslim Jana. Religion, therefore, is to make us better human beings and live in peace and harmony. Unfortunately, in the present times, some people use religion as a weapon and create fear psychosis. It is the time for us to keep the doors of our hearts open so that others can respond in the same manner. U Thant, the former Secretary General of United Nations, said about Gandhiji, and I quote, "Many of his principles have universal application and eternal validity." And I hope the passing years will show that his efficacy of non-violent pressure as an agent for peaceful change is as justified today all over the world as it was in his time in India. Unquote. Unfortunately, the policy of political violence introduced in 1905, about which Gandhiji spoke to that revolutionist in 1931, continues to exist in the name of freedom, which at times is misinterpreted. What is the idea of freedom? Freedom in the real sense is the breath of life. Gandhiji said in Young India on the 13th of September 1928, almost 100 years ago, that freedom won through bloodshed or fraud is not freedom. This was relevant then and is relevant now. He also said that, and I quote him, "When a man lives in submission to any system of government, it means he is paying the price of personal freedom." Unquote. So this was said in 1945, and many countries of the world, including us, are paying the price even now. What is happening between Ukraine and Russia or in Iran and Afghanistan is so painful. So, what is freedom? Freedom is connected with responsibility just as rights are connected with duties. Irresponsible freedom leads to anarchy. India's independence on the 15th of August 1947 was the promise of an inclusive, pluralist, democratic, and a just India. We are expected to share space and listen to each other. What wonderful dreams and vision those freedom fighters had, who wanted freedom from the British Empire and participated in non-violent satyagraha. But today, non-violent protesters are subjected to brutal cruelties everywhere in the world. Some may not like Salman Rushdie writes, but he has the freedom to write. The way he was attacked at the event which was to honor him shocked the world. Socrates was made to drink poison. Jesus Christ was nailed on the cross, and Gandhiji was assassinated. Someone doesn't like the color of someone's skin, and his life ends under the boot of an oppressor. He loses his breath while begging for breath. There were, and even now, are people who do not believe in live and let live. I do want to quote a statement by Salman Rushdie here, and I quote him, that people define their identity not by what they love, by what they hate, unquote. This is so true. I believe in having freedom to make mistakes so that I can learn, unlearn, and grow. I want freedom to make choices. Choice of place where I want to live, choice of profession I would like to pursue, choice of religion, language, life partner, etc. Unfortunately, many people are deprived of this freedom due to their socio-economic conditions or due to rigid and violent governance. In this context, freedom to make choices is a privilege which many of us tend to take for granted. Gandhiji, in his letter of 5th October 1945, addressed to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, wrote, I am convinced that if India is to attain true freedom, and through India the world also, then sooner or later the fact must be recognized that the people will have to live in villages, not in towns, in huts, not in palaces. Crores of people will never be able to live in peace with each other in towns and palaces. They will then have no recourse but to resort to both violence and untruth. I hold that without truth and violence, there can be nothing but destruction of humanity, unquote. Unfortunately, present-day villages are also reeling in violence and untruth. A picture of an ideal society, according to Gandhiji, is a casteless and classless society in which there are no vertical divisions. No one should be high or low. All services have equal status and carries equal wages. Those who have more use their advantage not for themselves, but as a trust to serve others, unquote. So Gandhiji's concern was the bottom of the pyramid, not the top. When he founded Gujarat Vidyapeeth on the 18th of October 1920 in Ahmedabad, A number of aims and objectives were formulated. I would like to mention 4 as follows. 1. Adhere to truth and non-violence. 2. Regard untouchability as a blot on Hinduism. 3. As the growth of the nation depends not on its cities but its villages, the bulk of the funds of the Vidyapith and large number of teachers shall be primarily employed in the propagation of national education in villages. And 4th, in laying down the priorities of education, the needs of the village dwellers shall have principal consideration. Unfortunately, this very Gujarat Vidyapith is completely changed, and Gandhiji's vision is seized, erased, abandoned. In 1894, during his stay in South Africa, Gandhiji got to read a book, India, What Can It Teach Us? It was written by Frederick Max Muller. The author mentions in the book that India's real and authentic lifestyle can be seen only in the villages. This book had a deep impact on Gandhiji. Another book that influenced him was given by his friend Mr. Henry Pollock. It was John Ruskin's Unto This Last. Gandhiji read it during the 24-hour journey from Johannesburg to Durban. It had such a magical spell on him that he could not lay it aside. It was the first book of Ruskin's he had ever read. It brought about an instantaneous and practical transformation in his life. He translated it later into Gujarati, titling it Sarvodaya, the well-being of all. He summarized its teachings in 3 points. 1. That the good of the individual is contained in the good of all. 2. That a lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's, since all have the same right of earning their livelihood from their work. And 3rd, that the life of labor, that is, the life of the tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman, is a life worth living. Unquote. The times have changed. Due to massive joblessness in the villages, there is huge migration from villages into the cities. Most of these migrants work as laborers. They live a life of exploitation, deprivation, and even humiliation. Last year, Professor K.P. Shankaran, a teacher of philosophy at St. Stephen's College, wrote in the Indian Express an article titled Interrogating Violence, and I quote, "Even though all of us know that violence in any form, be it in war, intimidation of people, communal discord, police brutality, rape, is essentially horrific, we remain largely indifferent to it as long as we are not affected directly." Unquote. We have seen people watching brutal murders, taking videos on their mobiles instead of rushing to help them. Such news once again reminds me of Gandhiji, that even after the partition of India, he had announced on the 18th of September 1947 that after completing the negotiations with the Muslim leaders in Delhi, he would like to go to Pakistan to pacify different communities killing each other. Animosity and hatred, even towards one's adversary, were not acceptable to Gandhiji. But in today's India, hate speeches have become a daily affair. How can it be stopped? How do we clamp down hate speech and hate crimes? Justice K.M. Joseph observed, and I quote him, "We would not have liked the government to come in at all. But in certain areas, when religious freedom, harmony, and orderly progress are gravely affected, it has to intervene." Today, what are we fighting about? We have more important things to achieve as a nation. After all, people are starving without jobs. One lady sent an article to Gandhiji about 7 social sins. As it corroborated his views about ethical practices, he published it in Young India, dated 20th October 1925. So, out of those 7 C's, I would like to read out all of them. The first one is politics without principles. Second, wealth without work. Third, pleasure without conscience. Fourth, education without character building. Fifth, commerce without morality. Sixth, science without humanism. And seventh, worship without sacrifice. So the theme of this festival clearly depicts the fact that we are concerned, that we care, that we are looking for the light. It is because the present is in the dark. How about lighting up the present so that we ensure that the future is bright? Thank you for your patience.